Good afternoon, everyone. So I guess we're going to take a slightly different tack to what we've seen in the past session, and in this talk I'll be discussing the work that the Geological Survey is doing from a commodity perspective to complement the broader geoscience work programs that the survey is undertaking. And as John mentioned, it's the emphasis on how this will provide a practical contribution to what we hope is the next generation of discoveries. So I'll start out with a bit of context and background, move on to the role and the approach of the survey, and then lastly provide some more specific insight into some of the work plans we have going into the future. So firstly, let's take a brief look at the production profile in South Australia. This figure shows the operating mine sites in South Australia as well as the approved future operations. In a nutshell, we've got a series of copper-gold operations, the largest of which, both by size and output, of course, is Olympic Dam. We have some uranium out in the Frome embayment, iron ore mining on the Eyre Peninsula, gold mines on both the Gawler and Curnamona provinces, and mineral sands out in the Eucla Basin, plus a few other things. The value of the minerals to South Australia is annually around about $4 billion, with petroleum adding just over $1 billion to that as well. No great surprise, copper's the biggest single contributor in recent years at around $2 billion a year. And the other mainstays for the South Australian output are iron ore, uranium, gold, as well as the collective value of the industrial minerals, mineral sands and construction minerals. So now I'll take a look at the exploration spend and where the money's been spent on exploration. So firstly, we see the total exploration spend in South Australia since 2001. We see a pattern here that most people will be familiar with. So pick up an exploration from 2005 through to the interruption with the GFC in about 2009, and then rapid expansion again in line with the last commodity cycle. Right through to about 2012 when things started to tail off again through to the low point we saw in 2016. So from an individual commodity perspective, we've got copper here first of all. So the solid lines, the copper gold exploration, and the dashed line at the bottom is the contribution from copper only exploration. Pretty much mirrors the total expenditure for the state, and as we can see it peaked up to just under $200 million back in 2007. Now, if we break this down into what was contributing to that, back in that first peak, we had the Olympic Dam expansion work going on. We also had the discoveries of Carrapateena and Prominent Hill. And then following the GFC, we had the second phase of work at Carrapateena and Prominent Hill, plus the discovery and development of the Hillside deposit. So again, this illustrates the value and importance of greenfields discoveries to the total exploration spend. Following the GFC and in line with the commodities boom, we had pick up in iron ore exploration in the state. Steady contribution from both uranium and gold across this period, and then there's a collection of other minerals or commodities that people have been exploring for, but at fairly low levels over this period. If we break this down as a proportion of spend by commodities, this illustrates what we've probably already worked out from the last slides. Copper exploration is the mainstay of exploration spending in South Australia. Over the last few years, it's been steady at around 30 to 40% of the total exploration spend. Iron ore has been a big contributor. Uranium and gold have been steady, along with all the other commodities. So, moving on, I'll now talk about the survey's role in supporting the exploration process. So the role of geological surveys is changing. In past generations, the role was principally directed towards the acquisition and provision of good quality baseline geoscientific data. This role has now progressed to adding value and knowledge to these data sets in ways that assist and promote exploration and ultimately help to reduce the exploration risk. The acquisition of baseline data is still a key function, but more so in targeted ways such as the recent Kumpana program, which will ultimately leverage another generation of exploration work. But which commodities? Ultimately, the survey has to decide which commodities to direct its resources and focus towards. The state's got a wide range of mineral commodities with varying degrees of perceived exploration potential and commercial context. So in this diagram, now this is not inclusive of every commodity in the state, but it covers off the bulk of them. I've divided them into three broad groupings. So at the top of the triangle here, we've got a group of commodities where the resource inventory is reasonably well defined. There are exploration opportunities remaining, but they're largely incremental. And the constraint to getting these commodities into production are more commercial considerations. At the other end of the spectrum, we've got a group of commodities where there's recognised potential in South Australia, and some of them certainly have had a production history. But by and large, they're either lacking exploration success or they don't have the scale significance. These commodities we'd put, we call or would say are at the concept development stage, or if you're in a more I guess on the private sector, you'd say you're at the project generation side. And it's not to say that if we do come up and develop concepts that are worthy of pursuing, then we're moving up into this middle group. And this is where these are the commodities that have a natural geological endowment in the state. They've got a long-term market position, so any discoveries can readily be transformed into production. But by and large, they're discovery constrained. We really need to help the exploration process here to make discoveries of more of these. So I'll move away from the specifics of the commodities at the moment and I guess digress into and provide some insight into the survey's approach. So in terms of the survey's approach, there are several elements. Firstly, it's considering how to translate the geoscience projects into practical exploration outcomes. The other elements are about the broader context in which the various investigations are pursued. In this regard, it's about adopting a mineral systems approach, but aligning this within the Uncover framework. So, to talk briefly about the mineral systems approach, I'm not going to go into any great detail about this morning. Sandy gave an excellent talk about this and with some really good insight and perspective on the concept. I guess another way of considering the concept is to look at the mineral systems approach as it's a conceptual organising framework which considers all the geological processes across the scales. The concept's not new. There's a lot of geologists that have been thinking intuitively like this for a long time, and it's probably this thinking that's developed the conceptual exploration models that have led to some of the most significant discoveries in recent times. What becomes more of a challenge, though, in this era is to effectively process and integrate the vast arrays of geoscientific data and knowledge that is now available. So the diagram on the right articulates two important concepts. Firstly, it's the breaking down of a mineral system into the contributing elements, but as importantly, articulating what the mappable criteria are to identify these contributing factors. So many of the survey's work programs are specifically addressing both the shortcomings in our knowledge of these ingredients and also the practicalities of mapping these criteria and ultimately the importance to exploration progress. So a mineral systems approach is not new, and certainly the Geological Survey is not starting from scratch. We've got a vast array of good quality geoscience work. It just needs to be brought into this framework. So it's essentially applying the context and knowledge to what could otherwise be considered disparate data sets, but is importantly turning these into outputs that will readily support the exploration process. So the next step beyond understanding and embracing the mineral systems approach is to understand how this translates practically. Now, we heard quite a bit about Uncover this morning, so I'm not going to go into detail on that, but the four broad themes with Uncover can be, I guess, further distilled into two main themes. We've got prediction and detection. So from a survey perspective, prediction is about developing the conceptual models that assist with prospective area selection. Detection is about understanding what ore bodies and their footprints look like and how the mappable elements can be detected. I think most people here will be pretty familiar with what the concept of search space is. Part of the survey's role is to recognise, define, articulate the search spaces that are relevant for exploration, improve these where appropriate, and potentially open up new search spaces where appropriate as well. Again, the example of Kupana is an example where by drilling the holes that we have recently, we've opened up that geological search space and provided some definition to an area where we knew very little about the geology previously. Another aspect of the detection side is to consider the set of tools that can be applied to both area and target selection. So now I'll talk a little bit about the specifics of one of the commodities, being gold. It's an area where the survey will be looking to apply some focus in the coming period. South Australia has a steady annual output of gold, albeit modest in comparison with some other jurisdictions, but let's look at a little bit further into what this actually looks like. So we've got a total gold inventory of past production and future resources of around 115 million ounces. But when we break that down, nearly 110 million ounces of that is as a byproduct with the copper gold systems. So the call-out boxes on the right here, so we've got all the known gold occurrences in the state are shown on this map. And the green call-out boxes there are all where gold occurs as a byproduct. Leading the way, of course, is Olympic Dam with just under 100 million ounces of contained gold. And they're shown in the yellowish call-out boxes are all the known gold, or where all the known gold inventory has come from the state as well. South Australia's last significant gold-only discovery to translate into production was Challenger, recognising, of course, we've had a few other smaller operations come into production as well. And from a geological survey perspective, we haven't had a dedicated focus on gold since the early 2000s, although we have an active community of mostly junior explorers continuing to pursue gold exploration. From a global perspective, Australia is still a leading destination for gold exploration, and the challenge for South Australia is to attract a greater share of this investment. So I'll briefly run through some of the concepts and ideas the survey is looking to do with its gold exploration focus. So firstly, there have been many advances in the understanding of gold systems in South Australia, both by researchers and explorers over the past decade. One of the first decades will be compile these outputs and learnings and make them available in a format that's both coherent, usable and relevant to explorers. This will in turn lead to the identification of data and knowledge gaps that require addressing. Part of the survey's role will be determining the best way to address these gaps and what collaborative opportunities there are to advance these. The survey is always willing to regularly engage with the active explorers, establish technical dialogues that benefit both parties and the broader industry. From a prediction perspective, part of the approach will be to identify and break down the different geological elements that are relevant to gold systems. For example, we know gold systems, most gold systems are fundamentally driven by fluid pathways across the full scale range. The work the survey has been doing through the AusLAM MT program is providing new insights into the larger scale lithospheric architecture, and we'll be looking at ways to integrate this with what we know about the distribution of gold systems and what practical implications this may present for area selection, further survey programs and exploration. Now, I won't go into any great detail on this diagram here. We've seen it several times today, but there's certainly some obvious correlations with gold systems and some that we need to do some further work on. I guess, and lastly, the enigma of the various sediment-hosted gold systems within the Adelaide Fold Belt will also be considered with a view to potentially developing new concepts that may warrant exploration testing. Detection for gold in South Australia, as it does elsewhere, remains the single biggest challenge for explorers. We are blessed or cursed, depending on your perspective, with some very old and complex regolith environments, subtle expressions, and compounded by variable cover sequences. We'll be looking at what the survey can do to address the integrity of surface geochemical data sets and the detail of our regolith understandings. The application of spectral and geophysical techniques are an area that is constantly evolving, and part of the survey's role is to keep pace with these developments and understand how they can be applied to exploration. So hopefully I've been able to convey or provide some insight in how the survey is considering the commodity aspects of exploration and what we're doing to contribute to advancing this. And I guess lastly, in closing, I'd like to throw open an invitation to all those in the exploration community that we don't have a dialogue with to make that connection with the Geological Survey. We're here to help. Thank you.